In 2016, Anthony Bourdain met an actress in Rome. Within 2 years, he was dead. Friends watched him become obsessed, flying across the world just to see her for days. He cut people out of his life, ignored his 11-year-old daughter, and lost himself completely. The night before he died, she sent him a brutal final message that shattered him. What really happened in that French hotel room would remain hidden until investigators found his phone. The truth about his final hours is darker than anyone imagined. Anthony Bourdain was born on June 25, 1956, in Manhattan. His family wasn't religious, but it was deeply tied to culture and words. His father, Pierre, worked in classical music and juggled multiple jobs to make ends meet. His mother, Gladys, was a strict and brilliant copy editor at the New York Times. Anthony grew up with his younger brother, Christopher, in Leonia, New Jersey, just 8 minutes from Manhattan. The town was wealthy, filled with big houses and well-off neighbors. But behind the doors of their own home, money was always tight. His parents spent more than they earned, sometimes using inherited money to stay afloat. They sent him to private school and took him on European vacations, but they were often just barely getting by. This odd mix of privilege and struggle shaped how Anthony saw the world. He felt close to luxury, but never truly part of it. That feeling of being an outsider followed him through life. One moment, though, changed everything. When he was around 10, the family visited the seaside town of Arcachon in France. A local fisherman offered Anthony a raw oyster, fresh from the sea. While others hesitated, Anthony swallowed it down. The taste, briny, salty, strange, hit him like nothing else. He later said it felt like the future. That one oyster didn't just spark his love for food, it lit a fire. He saw food as adventure, as risk, as something that could change the way you see the world. In school, he showed signs of rebellion early. He read banned books, listened to punk rock, and wrote edgy essays full of anger and dark humor. He admired writers like Hunter S. Thompson and got caught stealing things. By the time he was 14, he was already using drugs. His mother pushed for high standards, but he fought against rules. He didn't want to be tamed. He wanted to feel alive. At home, things were falling apart. The pressure of work, money, and clashing personalities pulled his parents in different directions. His father had a laid-back artist's soul. His mother was sharp, ambitious, and demanding. Their relationship cracked under the weight. Eventually, they divorced. Anthony didn't talk much about it, but it left a mark. That wound carried into his adult life and shaped how he viewed love, family, and trust. In 1973, Anthony graduated from high school a year early. He was just 17. He did it so he could follow his girlfriend, Nancy Podkowski, to Vassar College. Vassar had only started accepting male students in 1969, so Anthony was part of one of the first groups of men there. But he didn't care about classes. He cared about Nancy. They got arrested for minor drug charges and skipped lectures constantly. He spent more time reading underground comics and getting high than studying. His obsession with relationships and escape was already clear. He once admitted he went to Vassar not for education, but because he followed Nancy. He failed most of his courses, but something else happened that changed him more than any class ever could. In the summer of 1974, he went to Provincetown, Massachusetts. It was a wild, artsy town full of outsiders. He got a cheap apartment and a job as a dishwasher at the Flagship, a busy seafood place. He made less than $2 an hour, but he didn't care. The kitchen was loud, chaotic, and full of rough, funny people. He felt at home. Within weeks, he moved up to prep cook, then line cook. The energy, the teamwork, the speed, it gave him purpose. He felt like he finally belonged. By the end of 1975, he had to make a choice. Vassar cost nearly $5,000 a year, and his grades were a disaster. His parents were tired, broke, and frustrated. He told them he wanted to drop out and become a chef. They didn't fight him. At just 19 years old, Anthony Bourdain made a choice that would change his life forever. It was the fall of 1976, and instead of continuing his time at Vassar College, he enrolled in the Culinary Institute of America. The school was located 5 miles from Vassar, in Hyde Park, New York. Back then, not many people got formal culinary degrees. Kitchens were old school and strict, but Bourdain stepped into that world willingly. The training was intense. Classes lasted 12 hours a day, filled with hands-on work, tough theory lessons, and the kind of discipline usually found in the military. He didn't just survive it. He graduated in 1978, right before he turned 23, with a real chef's diploma in hand. At the time, food in America was still mostly bland, and no one thought of chefs as famous people. But Bourdain didn't care. He took his diploma and jumped straight into the chaos of New York's kitchens, unsure if he'd even make rent the next month. For nearly 20 years, Bourdain stayed in the brutal restaurant world of New York City. Through the late 70s and the 80s, he worked in places like the Supper Club, 1 Fifth Avenue, and Sullivan's. His life was non-stop pressure. He often worked 60 to 70 hours a week. Kitchens weren't peaceful. They were loud, hot, and harsh. One mistake could cost you your job. He once described how a Friday night at Les Halles felt like a war zone. Smoke and grease filled the air. The cooks moved fast and pushed hard. He joked that he'd run over his own grandmother just to keep the kitchen running. The pay was awful. In the 1980s, he earned less than $500 a week. Injuries happened all the time. Tempers exploded. Drugs and alcohol were common ways to deal with the stress. This wasn't some TV version of being a chef. It was real, rough, and exhausting. But through all of it, Bourdain kept going, bonding with other cooks over scars and sweat. By the early 80s, things started to spiral out of control. Bourdain's life looked wild from the outside, but inside it was falling apart. He started using heroin, then cocaine, then more. LSD, meth, mushrooms, pills. He once said he searched the carpet for anything that looked like drugs. Sometimes he smoked paint chips, hoping they'd work. He became mean and careless. He admitted he was awful to the people around him. He bullied dishwashers. He yelled at waiters. He was selfish, loud, and lost. But even at his lowest, he kept drinking. He said the memory of heroin was so dark, it scared him away from ever touching it again. He never forgot the image of himself, looking in the mirror with a needle in his arm. That moment stayed with him. Years later, he said that darkness helped shape who he became. The man who would tell raw, honest stories about food and life. Bourdain got married in 1985. His wife was Nancy Putkowski, someone he had known since high school. She was 2 years older and part of the same crowd he hung around with as a teenager. When Vassar College started accepting men, he followed her there. They had a wild and messy connection, often using drugs together and sneaking into restaurant kitchens during work hours. Their marriage lasted almost 20 years, but it was far from peaceful. As Bourdain's career picked up in the late 90s, the cracks in their relationship grew deeper. He admitted that fame and travel pulled him away. He said Nancy saw that as a threat, something that poisoned their bond. Eventually, the distance became too much. Their marriage ended in 2005. It had started with teenage rebellion and ended under the weight of addiction, fame, and long nights spent apart. Even while working full-time as a chef, Bourdain never stopped writing. In 1995, he published a crime novel called Bone in the Throat. It was set in New York's gritty kitchens and filled with details only someone who lived that life would know. 2 years later, he released another book, Gone Bamboo, a strange and funny story about assassins in the Caribbean. He wrote these books late at night after long shifts, while most cooks were drinking or sleeping. He pushed himself hard, juggling 2 lives at once. These books didn't make him famous, but they were a sign of what was coming. After 20 years of non-stop kitchen work, Anthony Bourdain finally got his shot in 1998. He became executive chef at Brasserie Les Halles in Manhattan. It wasn't just another restaurant. It was always packed, and people came for real French classics like steak frites and escargots. Bourdain had never led a kitchen before, and suddenly he was in charge of a machine that served hundreds daily. The pressure was intense, but he kept costs low and quality high. He called the shots, and for the first time, people actually listened. That experience became the heart of what would later become Kitchen Confidential. Les Halles stayed open until 2016, but after Bourdain died in 2018, fans turned the building into a shrine. That spot on Park Avenue South became a symbol of what he built during the toughest, most important stretch of his career. But things weren't okay behind the kitchen doors. Bourdain later called that time his psychotic rage period. He was miserable. He admitted he yelled at staff, bullied dishwashers, and lost control constantly. It wasn't just a short temper. He carried a lot of anger, and he let it fly at anyone in his path. He was exhausted, using drugs, and trying to keep up in a world that didn't let anyone slow down. Years later, he said it flat out. He'd hurt a lot of people, and he regretted it deeply. His reputation grew not just because of his food, but because everyone in the business knew how volatile he was. He wasn't proud of it. He looked back and saw someone bitter, destructive, and lost. And while he was running that busy kitchen, he was still using heroin. He didn't hide it in his writing. Even in the late 1990s, he talked about doing heroin and cocaine after long shifts, then dragging himself back into work the next day. The restaurant world, full of chaos and long hours, made it easier to hide. Nobody questioned it. He called it survival, but barely. Somehow, he still did the job. But he knew the toll. Nearly every cook he'd worked with from his early days didn't survive. They were gone. Overdoses, crashes, burned out. He managed to get clean in the early 2000s, but the damage was all around him. While working at Les Halles, he started to feel something building inside. He wanted to tell the truth about restaurant life. Not the pretty version, but the real stuff. The drugs, the recycled food, the toxic pressure. He filled notebooks with stories about what really went on behind kitchen doors. Then, in 1999, he wrote "Don't eat before reading this" and sent it to a few places. Most rejected it. Then, on a random night, drunk and fed up, he sent it to The New Yorker. He didn't think much would come of it, but that single act changed everything. His mother, Gladys Bourdain, was a longtime editor at the New York Times. She believed in him, and she knew how to get things done. She gave the article to a Times reporter who was married to David Remnick, the new editor of The New Yorker. That's how it landed on the right desk. It skipped the slush pile and got straight to someone who recognized its power. Without that little push from his mother, the article might have never seen daylight, but it did, and it hit hard. When The New Yorker published the article on April 19, 1999, people were shocked. It pulled the curtain back on how kitchens really work. Bourdain talked about old fish, reused bread, and how kitchens were filled with misfits looking for family. His honesty was raw. It wasn't the usual polished food writing. It was gritty, funny, and dark. Overnight, everyone knew who he was. People talked about it in diners, offices, and kitchens. His voice was different, and it mattered. That buzz led to Kitchen Confidential. He took the stories from the article and expanded them into a full memoir. Published in 2000, the book was wild. He wrote about sex, drugs, accidents, and everything in between. He told people not to order fish on Mondays or beef well done. He talked about slicing his thumb open mid-shift and still finishing dinner service. The book became a bestseller. It was translated into dozens of languages. Bon Appetit named him Food Writer of the Year. Suddenly, he wasn't just a chef. He was the guy telling the truth everyone else tried to hide. The transformation was fast. Within weeks of the book's release, Bourdain was on Oprah, Letterman, and every talk show that would have him. Publishers around the world came knocking. His life changed completely. In just 1 year, he went from working double shifts at Les Halles to traveling the world. Anthony Bourdain's first television show began in 2002. It was called A Cook's Tour and aired on the Food Network. Over 2 years, he filmed 35 episodes. What made this show different wasn't just his personality. It was the way he threw himself into strange and sometimes shocking food experiences. In one famous moment in Vietnam, he swallowed a cobra heart that was still beating. That moment shocked many viewers and became one of the show's most talked about scenes. Each episode took him to new places. He visited the fish markets in Tokyo, remote villages in Cambodia, and dined with geishas in Japan. He even ate wild game in Africa. The show was filmed with small Sony DV cameras. This gave everything a rough and real look that matched the way Bourdain spoke. He wasn't trying to be perfect. He was trying to be honest. This show didn't just talk about food. It talked about people, culture, and risk. It was the beginning of what would become his signature style. In 2005, he joined the Travel Channel and launched No Reservations. This show ran until 2012 and had about 140 episodes. It took him to more than 80 countries. But it wasn't just about travel or meals. It used food to explore deep political and cultural issues. In one episode, Bourdain went to Haiti after the 2010 earthquake. That episode won an Emmy for its powerful camera work. He also visited countries like Iran, where American crews were rarely allowed. In Namibia, he ate warthog parts. In Vietnam, he drank snake blood. The show won several Emmy Awards and was nominated many times. It proved that a food show could win serious respect if it told the truth. In 2011, Bourdain took on a faster challenge. He created a show called The Layover. Each episode gave him just 1 or 2 days to explore a city. He visited places like Singapore and Seattle. The goal was to show viewers what they could do during a real-world layover. The pace was fast, and the focus was on hidden local spots. He jumped between small food stalls and fancy bars, sometimes without even sleeping. The show ran until 2013 and became another hit. It connected with people who wanted to travel but didn't have much time. It showed that even short trips could be full of discovery. Over time, Bourdain became something more than a chef or TV host. He became a voice for culture. He sat at tables around the world and used food as a way to understand people. He told stories about war, poverty, and history. He showed how food is tied to survival, memory, and dignity. In Zambia, Cambodia, and other places, he helped viewers understand the world through the simple act of sharing a meal. He didn't only speak to famous chefs. He often listened to street cooks and home families. For him, a meal was not just about taste, it was about connection. In 2007, something big happened in his personal life. Bourdain married Otavia Busia. She was a mixed martial arts fighter. That same year, their daughter Ariane was born in New York on April 9th. Bourdain said this changed everything. He wrote that the moment he saw her being born, he started changing his life. Even with his hard schedule, he tried to make time for family. He came home to cook for Ariane and made Friday nights special. Being a father softened him. He said many times that he didn't just like being a dad, he loved it. Even later in his career, he said that time with Ariane brought him real happiness. In 2013, he took his storytelling even further with a new show on CNN. It was called Parts Unknown. The first episode aired on April 14th and took him to Myanmar. That country had been closed to most media for a long time, but Bourdain didn't just explore food. He explored struggles, politics, and hidden lives. The show won 12 Emmy Awards out of 31 nominations. It also won a Peabody Award. He went to places like Libya and the Congo, which weren't on most travel lists. The final episode took place in New York, his hometown. That felt like a return to his roots. But the CNN years showed what food TV could really do. At the same time, from 2013 to 2015, Bourdain tried something new. He became a judge on a cooking show called The Taste. It was on ABC. The twist was that judges tasted food without knowing who made it. Alongside Nigella Lawson, Ludo Lefebvre, and Brian Malarkey, he guided both home cooks and professionals. It was different from his usual work, but fans were surprised by how much he enjoyed it. He said he liked judging based on a single bite, rather than long talk. It was fast, real, and honest, just like him. In 2016, he filmed an episode of Parts Unknown in Argentina. It became one of the most emotional episodes of his career. In it, he went to therapy. Buenos Aires has more therapists than almost any other city, and Bourdain sat down with one on camera. He opened up about his sadness, his struggles with depression, and how little things could send him into deep sadness. He talked about how hard it was to open up to people he loved. This episode felt very personal. After his death 2 years later, it felt even more powerful. It showed a man who was brave enough to admit he was hurting. Behind the scenes, the pressure kept growing. Bourdain was filming almost 250 days a year. He gave everything to his work. But in private, he admitted that he often felt empty. He didn't enjoy the fame. He didn't like the attention. He sometimes told close people that he even disliked his fans. He was tired all the time. His text messages showed that the job that made him famous also made him feel trapped. He couldn't stop, even when he wanted to rest. In 2016, Bourdain and Otavia separated. They had been together since 2007 and had a daughter together, but their relationship couldn't survive the long work hours and constant travel. There was no scandal, no big fight. They simply grew apart because of the life he lived. Still, they stayed close friends. Otavia often supported him in public and posted happy family moments online. They continued to co-parent Ariane. Bourdain once joked that he thought he was marrying Sophia Loren, but ended up with Jean-Claude Van Damme. It was a funny way to show how strong and bold she had become through her MMA training. In late 2016, Anthony Bourdain was filming an episode of Parts Unknown in Rome. That's where he met Asia Argento for the first time. She was already a well-known actress and director in Italy. From the very beginning, there was something electric between them. Their connection moved fast. Within weeks, they became a couple. And soon, the media couldn't stop talking about them. At that time, Bourdain was still legally married to Ottavia Busia. But this new relationship didn't just change his private life. It changed the way he showed up in public. When Argento accused Harvey Weinstein of assault in October 2017, Bourdain was one of her most vocal supporters. He tweeted in her defense, took interviews, and stood beside her. Their bond, which started on camera, quickly became something more intense and harder to control. Friends were stunned by how fast things got serious. Some said Bourdain fell into a pattern of obsession. He would fly across the world just to see her for a few days. He ignored schedules, skipped work, and began cutting people out of his life. According to Charles Lerosin's biography, Argento wasn't always kind to him. She often dismissed him or made him feel small. But instead of pulling away, Bourdain leaned in harder. He sent gifts, wrote long messages, and made sacrifices. People close to him began using the word reckless. In one of his final texts, he told her, "You were reckless with my heart." That one line captured everything: his pain, his devotion, and how deeply it had all gone wrong. Then came the scandal that shocked almost everyone. In August 2018, the New York Times published a story about a $380,000 payment to actor Jimmy Bennett. He had accused Argento of sexually assaulting him in a California hotel in 2013. He was 17 at the time, and she was 37. In California, that's below the age of consent. The real twist came when documents showed that Bourdain had helped arrange the payment. He wanted to avoid publicity and protect them both from a media storm. Argento had admitted the encounter in texts. Bourdain took charge of the hush money. The payment was made just weeks before he died. For many in the Me Too movement, it felt like betrayal. Argento had been one of their strongest voices. Now she was at the center of a case that raised serious questions, and Bourdain had helped keep it quiet. As their relationship deepened, Bourdain became more distant from the rest of his life. He stopped seeing friends. He spent less time with his daughter, Ariane. She was only 11 when he died. People who knew him said he had started to disappear. For years, he had called being a father the best thing that ever happened to him, but in his final months, even that seemed to fade into the background. Ottavia later spoke about the pain Ariane felt after his death. The little girl who once looked up to her father was left with confusion, grief, and silence. His love for her never disappeared, but it got buried under the weight of everything else. His mental state began to spiral. The people around him saw it. Bourdain started taking steroids. He drank until he blacked out. He went to sex workers. He confessed in interviews that he felt alone. In one therapy session in 2016, he described his loneliness as crushing. That was long before things reached their breaking point. The combination of emotional pain and harmful choices created a storm he couldn't escape. Those who knew his past struggles with addiction were alarmed. But this time, it wasn't just about substances. It was about emotional pain that had no clear end. In early June 2018, he traveled to Strasbourg, France, to film another Parts Unknown episode. He was with Eric Reipert, one of his closest friends. They had known each other for nearly 20 years. The two of them stayed at Le Chambard, a quiet hotel in Kaisersberg. They spent time riding bikes, eating local food, and sharing old jokes. Rippert had been on several of Bourdain's shows and often played the calm presence next to Bourdain's wild side. From the outside, things looked normal. Bourdain was laughing, eating, and working. But on the inside, something had started to break. On June 3rd, new photos began circulating in Italian media. They showed Argento holding hands and hugging French journalist Hugo Clément at a restaurant in Rome. That restaurant wasn't random. It was the same hotel where she and Bourdain had often stayed together. The timing and location hit hard. Argento was reportedly furious about the photographers. She even asked one to delete the images, but the photos made it out. They spread fast. Global news outlets began asking for comments. For Bourdain, the betrayal wasn't just about infidelity. It was was about shared memories being turned into something painful. The text messages that followed were heartbreaking. Bourdain wrote to Argento saying he wasn't jealous. He told her he didn't want to control her, but he begged for kindness. "You were reckless with my heart, my life," he repeated. She responded with a cold sentence, "I can't take this." When he pressed again, her final words were blunt. "Stop busting my balls." Those were the last things she said to him. His final texts were desperate and raw. They revealed a man who felt broken and alone, pleading for comfort he didn't receive. On the night of June 7th, Rippert began to worry. Bourdain hadn't shown up for dinner. That wasn't like him. Rippert even pressed his ear to the wall to listen. At one point, he heard snoring and felt relieved. He thought everything was okay, but he couldn't have known what was really happening behind that door. Bourdain had spent the day working, eating, and joking like usual, but he had already started pulling away. He was surrounded by people, yet felt completely alone. The next morning, June 8th, Rippert knocked on Bourdain's door. There was no answer. At 9:10 a.m., he went inside and found his friend. Bourdain was gone. He was 61 years old. Police found no signs of foul play. There were no narcotics in his system, only traces of a prescribed medication. The news shocked the world. Tributes poured in. People from every continent shared memories, quotes, and meals they had cooked because of him. 5 days later, his body was cremated in France. His ashes were returned to the United States. Rippert later said the pain of that day would never go away. After his death, court records revealed that Bourdain left around $1.2 million to his daughter. The estate included $425,000 in cash and savings, $250,000 in personal items, and another $500,000 in royalties and intellectual property. Because Ariane was still a child, Ottavia was put in charge of managing it until she turned 18. There was one final, touching detail. Bourdain had also left his frequent flyer miles to Ariane. She would get to decide how to use them. It was his way of passing on the journeys that shaped his life, hoping she'd carry a part of that world with her. Even in his last decisions, he was thinking of her.